What's wrong? His voice was dull and matted, the air in the room gauzy. My mother died, I said. I need to find Stephen. Twice in my life, I've heard something that at the time I took to be the voice of God. Both times it was just one word, and both times it was the same word. Move. I have no way of knowing that what I heard was the voice of God, but I have no other explanation for hearing an audible voice when I was completely alone. And there's this. In my limited experience with God, He doesn't speak that often. So on those rare occasions when He deems it necessary, it seems that He might choose to be succinct. When I was 11 years old, I ran away from home. I don't remember the reason for it any longer, only that I felt hurt and unappreciated, and I thought I'd teach my family a lesson by depriving them of my presence for the rest of their lives. I got about a mile away before my resolve dwindled. I was already getting hungry and wondering what my mother might be making for dinner. I decided I wouldn't run away, but stay away long enough to be sure they were good and worried and wouldn't make the same mistake again. Maybe I'd stay out all night. I settled down under a large white oak in an otherwise open, grassy field and closed my eyes. Then came the voice, telling me to move. I opened my eyes, but there was no one there. I sat up and looked behind the tree. There was a thick smell of something like ozone and a tangible presence of something in the air. I stood up and ran home while a summer thunderstorm erupted behind me. Back at the house, no one had even noticed my absence, but by then I didn't care. I'd heard God speak, and I'd obeyed. A few weeks later, my brother Stephen and I were riding our bikes past the same field. It was a humid August afternoon. I was ahead of Stephen, but when I saw the oak tree, I skidded to a stop, and Stephen crashed into me. "What's the matter with you?" He glared at me as he righted his bike and dusted off his pants. I pointed to the tree. "So what?" he said. The oak had been split down the middle as if with a giant celestial cleaver, and the insides were charred black. I stood and stared. "It got hit by lightning," said Stephen. "So what? It happens all the time." I told Stephen about running away from home weeks earlier, about lying under the tree, about hearing the voice of God. If it had been anyone else, I would have kept silent. But I knew Stephen would appreciate what I was saying and not tease me about it. He'd known since he was 4 that he was going to become a priest. He took God stuff very seriously. He ran his finger along the charcoaled innards of the tree and tasted his fingers. "This didn't happen recently," he said. "It could have happened several weeks ago. It could have happened right after you left." We were silent on the ride home, but as we put our bikes away in the garage, Stephen put his hand on my shoulder. "Don't take this lightly, Thomas. Don't think this kind of thing happens to everyone. God has a plan for your life, and you better not ever forget it. I wish it had happened to me. But maybe that would have been too obvious. Maybe you needed a wake-up call." He dropped his hand from my shoulder and stared down at his shoes. When he raised his head, I saw that his eyes were brimmed with tears. Don't ever forget it. 20 years later, I was standing in the rain in front of the wrought iron gates of an asylum in the lush forest of La Honda, where my fiancée had gone to escape me and our wedding. At some point in the afternoon, the rain became heavier, and the gate guard left his booth to approach me. "Thomas," he said, "go home. It's almost Christmas. You've been here for weeks. What's it proved?" I put my hands on the bars of the gate and squeezed the cold iron. "I can't, Terry," I said. "She needs me here." He shook his head, then reached his arm through the gate and handed me half a Reuben sandwich wrapped in waxed paper. He looked at me and turned back to his booth. You may be as crazy as she is, he said. Then I heard the voice again. Move. It wasn't Terry. If I hadn't heard it when I was 11, I might have wondered, but there was no question. It was the same voice. It was God. A flash of lightning lit the surrounding hills and left the dense smell of ozone. I heard Terry mutter from the warmth of his booth, "Imagine that. Lightning in December." That night at the kitchen table in my apartment in South San Francisco, I hatched a plan to rescue Karen from the asylum where she'd cloistered herself. God's word to me was clear enough. I needed to do something. All the weeks of standing at those gates in the rain now seemed ridiculous. Despite everything Karen's doctors had told me, despite their warnings that my presence was not helpful, despite the fact that she had given orders that I not be admitted, everything had become clear. What Karen needed was not resolute patience, but action. She needed someone to do something. She needed me to move. Gaining access to Karen's room was surprisingly easy. At some point as I walked unnoticed through the asylum, all my careful planning began to appear superfluous. It was Christmas Eve and almost midnight, so there was only a skeleton crew of staff on duty. Karen's room was lit by the blue glow of her television. The flickering light bounced off the papered walls like moths. She was standing at the window staring out into the starless night. I stepped into the room silently, I thought, but Karen turned and viewed me with such apathy that for a moment I thought she'd been drugged. The room seemed void of oxygen, the walls made of thick, uncaring steel. "What are you doing here?" she asked, not at all surprised to see me, but perhaps only a little peevish, as if I'd gone to her apartment on our wedding day and seen her in her dress before the ceremony. "I'm here for you," I said. Karen stared, without quite looking at me. She lapsed into Latin and delivered my final sentence with a slight flick of her hand, dismissing me. Acta est fabula. Even if I hadn't known the meaning of the words, it wouldn't have mattered. Because she delivered them so void of emotion, tinted only by annoyance. Because her eyes were so blank, so empty of affection, this time there could be no room for misunderstanding. It's all over. The drama has been acted out. I stared at her for a moment more, still unwilling to believe we'd come to this. Karen's face was a ghostly blue, as expressionless as a stone. I turned and left, as silently as I'd arrived. Without even returning to my apartment, I began driving toward Montana and Perry. Without Karen, there was no reason to stay in San Francisco. Now the offer Perry had made on my wedding day seemed less like a backup plan and more like a determined course of action. "You know where to find me," he had said, touching my shoulder and giving it a squeeze, then ducking into a cab that took him to the airport. At the time, this transition from one life to another seemed elementary, as if I could simply walk through a threshold from one world to another, and as I did, the world behind me would vanish. Somewhere between Ritzville and Spokane, as the road ahead of me darkened into that awkward transition between light and dark, I pulled off the highway and crawled into the back seat. I thought I would fall right to sleep, but instead a vision of my wedding day began playing like a movie in my head, and I was too tired to fight it off. Karen is late. As the minutes tick off the clock, there's a great deal of good-natured ribbing from Perry and my brother. We are standing in a small anteroom at the front of the church. Every few minutes I poke my head out to see if there's any indication that Karen has arrived. My father is sitting in one of the front pews looking tired, my mother's absence conspicuous. It occurs to me that this is the first time I've seen him in a church since my mother's funeral. I don't even know if he goes to church anymore. I wish Ellen